things were tense backstage at Lakewood Church. The huge security guy's hand hovered close to Senator John Kennedy's arm. It felt like everything was about to explode, maybe even shake up Christianity and make 50,000 people question what they believed. John Kennedy, a senator from Louisiana, was surrounded by Joel Osteen's security. He seemed calm and in charge, like he'd seen it all before. He looked determined, like someone who'd fought tough battles with a clear conscience. The head of security said, quietly but firmly, "Mr. Kennedy, Pastor Osteen wants you to leave now." But Kennedy didn't just cause a scene. He showed how much he cared about what was right, something Joel Osteen might have misunderstood during all his talk about getting rich. The security team figured Kennedy would just go away quietly, like others had when Lakewood told them to. They weren't ready for the fact that Kennedy had spent months getting ready for this moment. He wasn't just there to give a speech. He felt morally obligated to call out what he saw as religion being misused. Osteen and his people didn't know that Kennedy had a fact that would show the difference between real help and empty promises. A fact hidden under fancy sermons and requests for money. A fact that would make people wonder if Kennedy was there to just say nice things or to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Kennedy looked the security guy in the eye and said with the same confidence that had made him famous in the Senate, "Tell Joel that I have a message for his followers, and nothing will stop me from delivering it." What happened next would be recorded on phones, shared online a lot, and force everyone in the church to face a hard question. What if all the talk about wealth and blessings was just to help a few people while leaving many others hopeless? If you want to know the truth about how Joel Osteen blurred the lines between real faith and making money, hit that like button and leave a flame in the comments. What you're about to see will challenge everything you think you know about modern Christianity and show you how to tell the difference between leaders who help and those who use people. It all started with a phone call on a normal morning. It seemed like a regular call, but there was something bigger going on. Joel Osteen's assistant, with the same friendly voice Lakewood Church was known for, called Senator John Kennedy with what she called a once-in-a-lifetime chance. "Mr. Kennedy," she said, sounding super excited, "Pastor Joel would be honored to have you share your thoughts at our next event." Imagine the impact when a respected senator inspires 50,000 people with stories of how fairness and honesty lead to blessings. But Kennedy wasn't easily impressed. After years in politics, he was good at seeing through people and figuring out when a request had hidden motives. As he listened to the assistant's carefully chosen words, he felt uneasy. The focus on blessings and money seemed off. It felt less like sharing knowledge and more like a plan to promote Lakewood's message about getting rich. Kennedy's gut told him there was more to this than just a speaking gig. He agreed to speak, but he also planned to dig deeper and find out what was really going on. In the days that followed, Kennedy did some serious investigating. He looked into Joel Osteen's teachings, watched sermons that promised wealth as a sign of God's favor, examined the church's finances, and, most importantly, listened to the stories of people who had followed Lakewood's promises and been hurt. He found a disturbing pattern of sad stories, families who had given their last dollars to the church, believing it would bring them blessings, only to end up losing their homes and going broke. Elderly members who had given their retirement savings, convinced that God would reward their generosity, now struggling to buy food and medicine. But one story hit him hard. Margaret Chen, an 82-year-old woman from Louisiana, the state Kennedy had sworn to serve. Margaret had sent her entire Social Security check to Lakewood for months, trusting Osteen's promises that her gifts would unlock God's wealth. She died alone in a cold house because she had given her money to the church instead of paying her bills. Her grandson's words, written in a letter, haunted Kennedy. "I thought God would take care of me if I took care of his pastor." He felt the weight of those words. After reading Margaret's story, Kennedy realized something had to change. This wasn't just about different beliefs or motivational speaking gone wrong. It was about a system that seemed to take advantage of vulnerable people hiding behind religion. As a senator who had built his career on protecting the people of Louisiana, Kennedy saw Margaret's story as more than just a tragedy. It was a call to action, an invitation to stand up for those who had been deceived. If he truly believed in fairness, responsibility, and protecting the helpless, he knew he couldn't stay silent. The Jesus he had read about in the Bible, the one who criticized those who exploited the poor, who stood up for the marginalized, and who condemned hypocrisy, wouldn't have ignored this. Neither could John Kennedy. Margaret's story wasn't just one woman's failure. It represented countless others who had been told their poverty was a sign of spiritual failure, their struggles a lack of God's blessing. It was a betrayal of trust, and Kennedy felt he had to do something about it. The night before his appearance at Lakewood, Kennedy sat alone in his hotel room, not practicing his speech, but thinking deeply about his responsibility. This wasn't about politics or winning points. It was about standing up for people like Margaret Chen, whose faith had been used against them. He He thought about the countless others who had been taught to measure their worth by their wealth, their devotion by their donations. In that quiet moment, Kennedy asked himself a question. What would real integrity look like in a place that seemed to value profit over people? He remembered the stories of those who had given everything only to be left with nothing but broken promises. He thought about the scriptures that spoke of justice, of caring for the widows and orphans, of holding those in power accountable. As he got up from his chair, Kennedy felt a sense of clarity that went beyond politics. Tomorrow, he wouldn't just be a guest speaker giving prepared remarks. He would be a voice for those who had been silenced, a defender of truth in a place that might not want it. His preparation wasn't about crafting a perfect speech. It was about preparing himself for a moment that required courage, conviction, and an unwavering commitment to doing what was right. The day arrived, and Kennedy walked into Lakewood Church, calm and focused. Things were tense backstage. The security team was there, a quiet sign that his visit was already causing a stir. As he waited, the head of security came up to him with two others, all looking serious. "Mr. Kennedy," the main officer said, sounding a bit nervous, "there's a change of plans. Pastor Joel wants us to take you somewhere else." But Kennedy just reached into his coat and pulled out a small piece of paper. The officers tensed up, then relaxed when they saw it was just a handwritten note. "Before I go," Kennedy said, his voice showing years of fighting for those without a voice, "I have a message from Margaret Chen's family." He read the message clearly, his tone steady but strong. "My mother died thinking God had left her because Pastor Joel said problems come from a lack of faith. She gave her savings to his church and suffered in the cold. Please tell people the truth." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of a life lost and trust broken. The officers, used to dealing with disruptions, were quiet for a moment, looking at a man whose calm resolve seemed to have a moral power they couldn't ignore. Kennedy carefully folded the message and looked at each officer. "Guys," he said, his voice firm but kind, "you can take me away, and I'll go quietly. But Margaret Chen suffered because your pastor teaches that struggles are personal failing. If you silence her story, you're part of the system that hurt her." The main officer's phone buzzed, Joel Osteen's voice, sharp and urgent. "Get him out of there before the service starts." But as the officer moved closer, something unexpected happened. Kennedy smiled, not angry or defiant, but with the same calm empathy he used in Congress, said, his voice now filled with a strength that seemed to fill the room, "Tell Joel I have a message for his congregation, and nothing will stop me from delivering it." The officers hesitated, unsure in the face of a man who stood not for himself, but for the truth. What happened next would be caught on many cameras, shared millions of times, and would show that a lawmaker known for his honesty could turn a tense moment into a powerful chance for honesty. The backstage area of Lakewood Church was a quiet place with smooth hallways. For Senator John Kennedy, it felt like the calm before a storm he'd been preparing to face for weeks. The air crackled with the importance of what was about to happen, a moment that could change how millions see religion and honesty. Kennedy stood, alone for a moment, his mind sharp, his spirit strengthened by a resolve that had been built not just in Congress, but in the quiet moments of thought that had led him to this point. He wasn't there to play a role or seek praise. He was there to speak for people like Margaret Chen, whose stories had been hidden by promises of wealth. The security team's attempt to remove him had failed, not because of force, but because of the quiet power of truth, a strength that made even experienced officers pause. As he adjusted his coat, the handwritten message from Margaret Chen's family, safely tucked inside, reminded him of the weight of the responsibility he had chosen to carry. This wasn't about politics or personal gain. It was about standing up for the vulnerable, for the people of Louisiana and beyond, who had been misled by teachings that link faith with financial success. The lawmaker's preparation had been thorough, not just in gathering facts, but in grounding himself in the principles that had guided his career: fairness, responsibility, and a deep commitment to protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. What happened next would test that preparation, as Kennedy faced not just Joel Osteen's security, but the entire structure of a church built on carefully managed promises. Stick with me here, because when an honest person steps into a place built on money, things are going to change big time. What John Kennedy did in those first moments would set the stage for a fight that went way beyond just Lakewood. He started getting ready for this weeks before, even before he got to Houston, after that weird phone call from Joel Osteen's assistant, asking him if he'd share his views at Lakewood. Kennedy's senses were on high alert. He wasn't going to take things at face value, not when people's trust was at stake. He'd spent his life asking tough questions, digging into the details others missed, and he approached this request the same way. Late at night in his office and hotel room, Kennedy looked over Osteen's sermons, financial records about Lakewood's operations, and, most importantly, stories from people who'd followed the church's teachings. What he found wasn't just hopeful talk. It was a trail of ruined lives. Families who'd spent their savings thinking their donations would bring them wealth, only to lose their homes. Single parents who skipped meals to send money to Lakewood, hoping for a miracle that never came. Seniors like Margaret Chen, who gave their last dollars, only to be left poor while the church got rich. Each story was part of a bigger picture, one that showed a system that seemed to profit from people's desperation. Kennedy's research wasn't just academic. It hit him hard. Margaret Chen's story really stuck with him. The 82-year-old Louisiana woman's tragedy, dying in a cold house after giving her welfare check to Lakewood, really got to him. Her grandson's letter, with its painful words, "I thought God would take care of me if I took care of his minister," was more than a story. It was a call to action. Kennedy saw in it a reflection of countless others in his home state and beyond who'd been led to believe their struggles were a sign of spiritual failing. As he went through similar reports, he found more cases: ex-soldiers, retirees, struggling parents who'd been convinced that faith meant giving money, only to be ruined when the promised blessings didn't come. These weren't just numbers, they were real people, many from communities Kennedy had promised to help. The lawmaker's prep wasn't just about finding proof, it was about understanding what this wealth doctrine did to people. He looked at religious texts not as support, but as a guide, thinking about passages about fairness, humility, and helping the poor. The words of Jesus warning against those who take advantage of widows, and stressing that real worth is in service, not riches, resonated with him. Kennedy wasn't getting ready for a show. He was preparing for an ethical stand, one that would need the same courage he'd shown in challenging powerful interests in Washington. The night before he was to be at Lakewood, Kennedy didn't practice a speech or polish talking points. Instead, he sat quietly in his hotel room, the weight of Margaret Chen's story heavy on him. He thought about the responsibility of leadership, not just in government, but in moments that demanded moral clarity. He reflected on the principles that had shaped his career: standing up for the overlooked, holding the powerful accountable, and speaking the truth, even when it was uncomfortable. This wasn't about scoring political points or getting attention. It was about being a voice for those who'd been silenced by a system that seemed to exploit their faith. Kennedy asked himself a question that cut to the heart of the matter. What does it mean to lead with integrity in a place that might value money over people? The answer was there in the stories of people like Margaret, in the religious texts that called for justice, and in his own commitment to helping the people of Louisiana. As he came out of that moment of reflection, Kennedy knew that the next day would require more than words. It would need action based on ethics. He wasn't just going to Lakewood to speak. He was going to challenge a narrative that had caused real pain, armed with nothing but honesty and a determination to make a difference. When the day arrived, Kennedy walked into Lakewood Church, quiet but determined. Things backstage felt fancy but tense. The security team being there was a subtle reminder that his visit was already causing trouble. As he waited, the head of security came over with two others, looking professional but serious. "Mr. Kennedy," the officer started, sounding a bit hesitant, "there's a change of plans. Pastor Joel wants us to escort you out." Kennedy, unfazed, reached into his coat and pulled out a small piece of paper with a message from Margaret Chen's relative. The officers tensed up for a second, then relaxed when they saw it was just a handwritten note. "Before I go," Kennedy said, his voice steady like someone who'd faced tough opponents in politics, "I have a message from Margaret Chen's relative." He opened the note and read it clearly and deliberately. "My mother died thinking God had left her because Pastor Joel said problems come from a lack of faith. She gave her money to his church and suffered in the cold. Please tell people the truth." That words hit hard. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of a life lost and trust broken. The officers, trained to handle disruptions, seemed unsure of what to do, facing someone whose calm resolve showed a moral strength they couldn't easily dismiss. Kennedy carefully folded the note, looking from one officer to the next. "Guys," he said, his voice firm but kind, "you can take me away and I'll go quietly. But Margaret Chen suffered because your pastor teaches that problems are personal failings. If you silence her story, you're part of the system that hurt her." The officer's radio buzzed with Joel Osteen's voice, cutting through the tension. "Get him out of here before the service starts." The officers moved closer, their actions automatic, but reluctant, as if unsure how to deal with someone who commanded respect. Then, something unexpected happened. Kennedy smiled, not with anger or defiance, but with the same steady empathy he'd developed through years of speaking up for those who had no voice. "Tell Joel," he said, his voice now filled with a that seemed to fill the the space, that Margaret Chen's story deserves to be heard, and nothing will stop that. The officers hesitated, their resolve wavering in the face of a politician whose commitment to truth was clear. They'd expected resistance or argument, but not this. Someone standing firm, not for himself, but for those who'd been hurt. In that moment, something shifted. The officers, used to keeping order, couldn't respond decisively. Kennedy's words, rooted in the raw truth of Margaret Chen's story, had broken through their sense of duty. The message in his hand wasn't just a piece of paper. It was of the countless lives by promises that hadn't been kept. Kennedy's willingness had brought him here, not for his own gain, but to where truth demanded action. The security team's hesitation was a crack in Lakewood's carefully atmosphere, a sign that truth, when spoken with conviction, could disrupt even the most power structures. What happened next would be recorded on devices all over the world. That a politician known for his had the potential to turn a tense moment into a call for responsibility. The conflict was just starting, but Kennedy's stand had already set the tone. Someone dedicated to truth was about to step into the spotlight, not to shine for himself, but to the stories of those who'd been forgotten in the shadows. The story is about to keep going. When John Kennedy stepped past that backstage, he would carry Margaret Chen's story into an area, starting something that would go far beyond Lakewood's walls and the meaning of faith and leadership. The big doors of Lakewood Church's holy place swung open with a loud bang as Senator John Kennedy walked down the aisle. He walked steadily, cutting through Joel Osteen's talk about how to get rich, making sure everyone knew he was there. The crowd of 50,000 started whispering, then got really interested. Osteen's speech stumbled as Kennedy walked in. Kennedy's calm but strong presence took over the huge room. The security guards who tried to stop him backstage were brushed aside by a guy with just a handwritten note and a strong belief in telling the truth. Joel Osteen's smile tightened as he watched Kennedy approach, like he'd been waiting for this. He wasn't just another speaker. He was a Louisiana senator known for being honest, walking into a place built on promises that Kennedy thought were tricking people. The cameras broadcasting live to millions caught everything that happened in what would be a big moment for religion. It was a moment that would question the idea of getting rich through faith and make people face reality. As Kennedy walked onto the stage, the air got thick with anticipation. People knew something important was about to happen. When someone with morals stands up to a system built on money, things change. What John Kennedy did next would start something that would spread far beyond Lakewood. Kennedy walked to the center of the stage, and everyone went quiet, even without a microphone. "My name is John Kennedy," he said, his voice steady, "and I'm here to share a message from someone who can't speak anymore." The room, usually buzzing with excitement, went silent. Kennedy pulled a letter from Margaret Chen's daughter out of his pocket and held it up for the cameras. "This is from the daughter of Margaret Chen, an 82-year-old woman from Louisiana," he said clearly. "Margaret died alone in a cold house, her utilities cut off because she gave her last money to this church, believing that faith would bring her riches. She thought her donation would earn God's favor, but instead she suffered while this church got richer." The silence was heavy, a big change from Lakewood's usual happiness. The crowd, used to hearing about hope and wealth, was faced with a story that cut through the surface. Kennedy's calm but caring words made Margaret's death real, forcing people to think about what their beliefs were costing them. Kennedy turned to Joel Osteen, who stood frozen behind his stand, and looked him straight in the eye. "Pastor Joel," he said, his voice a mix of sympathy and challenge, "Margaret Chen trusted you and believed that being poor meant she wasn't faithful enough. She gave everything, and it cost her life. How many others have suffered while being told that their problems are because they don't have enough faith?" The question hung in the air, a direct challenge to Osteen and the idea of getting rich through faith. Some people in the crowd shifted, some wiped away tears, and some stood up, struggling to understand what was happening. Kennedy opened an old Bible, clearly marked from lots of reading. "Let me share something," he said, his voice strong. "In Matthew 19, Jesus told a rich young man, 'Sell what you own and give the money to the poor, and you'll have treasure in heaven. Then come, follow me.' But the man went away sad because he had a lot of money." Kennedy paused to let that sink in. Then he quoted Jesus, "It's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich person to enter God's kingdom." "Pastor Joel," Kennedy asked, "when was the last time you preached on that?" The question hit hard. Joel Osteen looked pale and gripped the podium, his usual confidence gone. "John, you're taking that out of context," he stammered. Kennedy, like a skilled lawyer, replied calmly but firmly, "Okay, let's add the context then. Jesus didn't promise riches or an easy life. He said, 'In this world you will have trouble.' He called on his followers to carry their cross, to give to the poor, to store up treasure in heaven, not on earth. He warned against those who take advantage of the vulnerable for profit." The crowd wasn't quiet anymore. The place was buzzing with emotion. Some were crying openly, their faces showing the pain of a broken dream. Others were shouting out questions, confused confused and angry. Some headed for the exits, their faith in Lakewood shaken. The cameras caught it all as a politician known for honesty stood on Lakewood stage, holding up a mirror to its practices. Then something shocking happened. Members of Lakewood's worship team, ready to lead the next song, put down their instruments and walked off. The lead singer, her voice shaky but firm, grabbed the microphone. "We can't sing about a God who promises riches when Jesus talked about giving," she said. "We're done." One by one, the team left, a silent protest against the prosperity message. The crowd erupted, some in shock, others in tears, a few applauding the courage of the act. Kennedy remained calm, a point of quiet in the chaos. He brought up Margaret Chen's story again, the woman who thought her poverty meant God had abandoned her. But the Jesus of the Bible was born in a barn, had no home, and died with nothing, Kennedy said, his voice full of feeling. He didn't measure faith by wealth. He measured it by love, by compassion, by how we treat the least among us. Margaret Chen's giving showed more faith than many who profit from it. Joel Osteen, now clearly nervous, tried to take control. "John, let's take this off stage," he said, his voice barely audible over the crowd's noise. But Kennedy faced him directly, his gaze intense. "Pastor Joel, this isn't about a private chat. This is about the people here, the people watching who've been told their struggles are their fault, that their faith isn't strong enough because they're not rich. Margaret Chen's story is like so many others who trusted you and were left broken. The truth deserves to be heard now." The crowd reacted strongly. Some stood up and cheered. Others knelt in prayer. A few canceled their recurring donations to Lakewood on their phones. The cameras zoomed in, capturing a congregation wrestling with a truth they had never questioned. Kennedy's words weren't an attack. They were a call to rethink faith based on the Bible and the real lives of people like Margaret. And the politician's position wasn't about tearing down one person, but about pushing a message overshadowed by promises of wealth. The crowd's response, tears, questions, acts of spontaneous kindness, showed a big shift. Some passed money to those near them, inspired by Kennedy's call to give to the poor. Others whispered prayers, their faces showing both sadness and understanding. The worship team's walkout had been a spark, but Kennedy's words were the flame, igniting a movement that challenged Lakewood's core. Joel Osteen stood there, sweat on his brow, his world shaking. He stared at the screen but couldn't read it, his eyes locked on Kennedy. The cameras caught him as he stammered, "Security, reset the system." But the words didn't fit with the crowd's reaction. Many folks were wrestling with decision: stick to easy promises or embrace the difficult honesty Kennedy had shown. Kennedy stepped forward one last time. "This is not about me," he said, his voice cutting through the noise. "This is about Margaret Chen and so many others who gave everything and were left with nothing. It's about what faith truly means, not wealth, but standing up for what's right." The stage wasn't Osteen's anymore. It belonged to the truth Kennedy had brought, and the flaws in the prosperity teachings were growing wider. "Stay with me." Kennedy's goal wasn't just to challenge one group, it was to give a view of faith based on honesty, pushing millions to pick between simple promises and real belief.